对。
然后个人的话，像我讲，手巧比较对老板。
我也没有，刚发现我忘了带另外一个。对，我有带两个。对。
这样讲我就知道了。
尊敬的各位来宾，大会将在10分钟后开始，请您尽快就座，并将手机等通讯设备置于静音状态。谢谢合作。Distinguished guests, our conference will start in 10 minutes. Please be seated and mute your mobile phones and other electronic devices. Thank you for your cooperation. 尊敬的来宾，请注意置于座椅上的同传设备。频道1为中文频道，频道2为英语频道。如果同传设备故障，请到位于会场后方的同传设备更换处更换。会议结束后，请将同传设备放置在座椅上。谢谢。Distinguished guests, there are simultaneous interpretation devices on your seats. Channel 1 is for Chinese and Channel 2 is for English. If you have any problem with the interpretation devices, please ask the staff at the back of the hall for help. At the end of the conference, please leave your interpretation devices on your seats. Thank you very much.
我
尊敬的各位来宾，大会将在5分钟后开始，请您尽快就座，并将手机等通讯设备置于静音状态。谢谢合作。Distinguished guests, our conference will start in 5 minutes. Please be seated and mute your mobile phones and other electronic devices. Thank you for your cooperation. 尊敬的来宾，请注意置于座椅上的同传设备。频道1为中文频道，频道2为英语频道。如果同传设备故障，请到位于会场后方的同传设备更换处更换。会议结束后，请将同传设备放置在座椅上。谢谢。Distinguished guests, there are simultaneous interpretation devices on your seats. Channel 1 is for Chinese and Channel 2 is for English. If you have any problem with the interpretation devices, please ask the staff at the back of the hall for help. At the end of the conference, please leave your interpretation devices on your seats. Thank you very much.
每15分钟都几个超市。
好，每15分钟几个。那到时间最后一个呢？
别超市我怕影响嘉宾，对吧？
给你举那5分钟吧，就每
5分钟吧
15分钟，
15分钟举5分钟，
然后到时间了，我给你举。
到时间就该举什么举。
我就这样给你举，稍微晃一下。对。哦，罗老师来了。
罗老师。
已经5分钟上已经说好了，跟那个邵老师约好了，然后一会儿现在开始，然后讲话也是这样。好，我跟您说，现在每一个然后都要去给您回答刚才您说的这个自己编的然后接了一。
尊敬的各位来宾，大会即将开始，请您尽快就座，并将您的手机等通讯设备置于静音状态。谢谢合作。Distinguished guests, the conference will start soon. Please be seated and set your mobile phones and other communication devices to the silent mode. Thank you for your cooperation. 有请主持人主持会议。
Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we have a very great turnout today. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the 11th Beijing Xiangshan Forum. My name is Zhao Yunfei. I'm with CGTN. And today we're going to talk about security in the Asia Pacific. This is a very unique time over here in the Beijing Xiangshan Forum. Because this is our first session of the first day, and then we want to take this opportunity of the very first morning to talk about regional affairs. And this morning we're expecting to talk about the regional affairs in the Asia Pacific, as well as the relationship between China and the US, as well as the security in Europe. And we begin with Asia security, the security in the Asia Pacific. As we all know, that Asia Pacific are sharing a long-lasting stability and peace, as well as prosperity, due to the relationship between the neighbors in the continent. And today, of course, we're also going to talk about little twists, little concerns over the security issue we're facing close to China, as well as in the Asia Pacific. So, without further ado, let me introduce our distinguished guests. Now, let's welcome our guests to come to the stage. Welcome. Please take your seat. This morning we have Major General Nie Songlai, Research Fellow of the Institute of War Studies at PLA Academy of Military Sciences. That's our Chinese representative of this dialogue. And then we also have Ambassador Yi Guski Angong Wasaka Puja, if I pronounced it right, Executive Director of ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation. And he's also the former permanent representative of Indonesia to the United Nations. Welcome, gentlemen, to our discussion. First of all, welcome to both of you. My first question to both of you guys is that what's your overall evaluation of the current security situation in the Asia Pacific? Let me start from you. 聂将军，因为亚洲是我们的，我们身处亚洲哈，您怎么看待我们现在的这个亚洲的安全局势？
女士们、先生们，大家上午好。首先感谢各位参加今天的这个论坛。我们一起共同探讨亚太安全问题。我也要感谢主持人刚才的介绍，还有提出的问题。这是一个很好的问题啊。我们今天这个论坛的主题是叫共筑和平，共享未来啊。这个我想啊，就是为大家提供这么一个平台，让我们有机会一起分享我们对全球和地区问题的一些这个看法，为中国国家主席啊，习近平提出的我们叫世界之问时代之问啊，贡献我们的一些各位的智慧。习主席的这个问题啊，核心就是两个，一个就是世界怎么了，第二个就是我们怎么办。一个问题涉及到我们的一些认知。第二个问题呢，涉及到我们的一些举措啊。那么刚才这个主持人讲到我们对亚太安全这个总的形势怎么看特别是在当前的背景下怎么看？我觉得这实际上涉及到这个两个方面的内容。一方面的内容就是我们怎么看这个大的这个时代背景。因为要了解亚太安全，必须了解我们所处的这个大的时代背景。这个亚太地区只是全球的这个一部分啊。第二个就是我们要看亚太的这个安全形势啊。那么全球的安全形势啊，我想这个大家都知道，全球这个战略格局啊正在发生深刻的这个变化。我们中国经常讲把它叫世界。叫百年之变，就是百年未有之大变局，这是中国国家主席这个习近平提出来的。习主席讲到这个百年变局的时候，讲了6个变化，一个是叫世界之变，一个叫时代之变，一个叫历史之变，这是总的这个3个大的变化。 习主席在军事和这个安全领域还讲了这个3个这个变化，一个叫科技之变，一个叫这个战争之变，这个还有一讲了这个对手战争的对手对手之变。那么我理解习近平主席讲的这6个之变，大概体现了这么几个方面。第一个，我们知道我们这个大的这个全球和地区的格局在发生深刻的变化。我们经常讲这个全球化，讲这个信息化讲这个文化的多样化等等，这些我觉得大的趋势应该说是不可改变的，但是也有曲折，所以我把它叫在曲折当中向前发展。第二个，这个我们这个时代大的变化就是地区和全球的力量格局、力量的对比在发生这个深刻的这个变化。我们中国人有2句话一般来说一句话呢就叫这个东升西降的趋势没有改变第二句话来叫西强中弱的总体态势还没有改变这是第2个大的变化。第3个大的变化大家都是非常清楚我们的全球治理体系也在发生深刻的变化。为什么会发生深刻变化呢？就是我们面临很多的安全问题，这个安全问题需要我们建立更加公正合理的新的秩序，包括政治秩序、安全秩序经济秩序等等这是我们讲的第3个大的这个变化。第4个变化我们大家都清楚，就是科技发展也在发生深的变化。可以说这个现在信息技术还有人工智能这样一些技术的发展已经使我们人类对世界的认知不断的这个突破这个边界和底线同时这个科技的进步也给我们大家的日常生活带来了这个深刻的这个变化。我们香山论坛举办这么多年来以后大家这个所用的这个我们先进的这个电子设备已经发生了深刻的这个变化这就是其中的一个很重要的这个体现这是我讲第这个4个大的这个变化。那么这5个大的变化，我觉得国际的这种政治思潮也是发生了很大的这个变化。一方面有一些正面的像这个全球化是吧这样一些思想，同时也有一些思想像这个逆全球化的思想保护主义还有我们讲的这个是吧这个极端主义甚至一些民粹主义这样一些思潮我们也看到最后一个我觉得一个大的变化，我是军人，我是搞军事的，我觉得军事领域也发生了深刻的变化，特别是战争形态和战争的方式也在发生深刻的变化我们讲现代战争它这个应该说它的这个总体性，它的混合性在这个逐步的这个加强，它的这个信息化的特征已经非常明显了，智能化的特征也是越来越突出了。这呢，我花一点时间来把这个我所理解的时代背景给大家作为一个总的这个描述，是吧？我们在这个大的框架下来讨论亚太安全问题。那么第2个问题呢，就是涉及到亚太安全怎么看？我个人认为应该全面客观辩证的来看这个形势。现在有2个倾向值得注意，一个就是吧，一味的强调是吧这个地区的矛盾这个问题冲突是吧，把形势看得过于悲观。另外一方面，我觉得我们也不要掩耳盗铃觉得是个天下太平了这个一切都好了这个我觉得也不是这么个情况，所以我们应该全面客观辩证的来看。我个人觉得总体上说，如果总体来讲，应该说一个方面，亚太地区保持了这个和平、稳定和繁荣的基本态势，这个我们必须肯定这里边是表现在哪些方面呢？比如说 我们求和平、促发展、谋合作，这是大家的共同愿望。亚太国家今天有很多代表在这儿，我想没有哪个代表会站出来反对，说我不赞成你说的这一条，我估计会没有，再一个，我们亚太地区的总体局势保持了稳定。我们现在可以看到，是吧？亚太地区是吧？尽管有矛盾、有分歧，但是和世界其他地区相比，我们至少没有战争吧，所以我们是和平发展的高地为什么叫是重要的这个增长的板块嘛所以我觉得这是第二个。第三一个，大家必须承认，亚太国家之间的合作、交流、一体化的这个程度在逐渐的加深，这是我想总的形势我们要肯定。所以我个人觉得，是吧？总的形势亚太应该说是机遇和挑战并存，有喜也有忧，但是不能叫喜忧参半。为什么不叫参半呢？我觉得这个喜的东西要多于这个忧的这个部分，是吧？我们说和平的力量这个在增长，战争的力量或者说影响安全的因素也在增长，但是总体来说，和平因素的增长要超过了影响或者破坏安全因素的这个增长，这是我个人的看法。但是我刚才讲了，还要看到另一面，我们存在很多的，是吧？必须警惕的矛盾问题，这个我们不能回避。所以亚太安全有很多不稳定、不确定的因素。如果有机会、有时间，我们下面还可以继续来探讨这些问题。但是我想讲两条。第一条，我们香山论坛办这个论坛的目的，不是来对抗的，不是来这个来唱对台戏的，我们是来唱来大家一起为了促和平、谋发展、促合作来的。所以我不想尽可能，我想咱们不要挑起一些矛盾和问题，是吧？这是第一个想法。第二个想法，我觉得为什么这么说？中国现在大家都看到中国的和平发展了，那么对中国和平发展有两种看法，一种认为是危险，我想大家也应该承认，有的国家确实是这么看的，但是我想大部分人认为中国的发展是机遇。所以我个人觉得中国的和平发展应该说是影响世界格局变化的一个重要的或者说最重要的变量之一我不说就是最但是我说应该是最之一这是一个。所以呢，就是说中国的和平发展是吧，是维护亚太地区和平稳定的一个重要的这个砝码。习主席讲过，说中国的这个和平发展，中国的力量每增长一分，那么世界和地区和平的希望就多一分。所以今天我们这个会叫共筑和平，共享未来。我为什么对这个充满信心呢？就是我有这个底气，就是中国的和平发展是维护亚太安全的重要因素，甚至可以说是应对亚太不确定性的最大确定性因素。我先花点时间给大家讲一讲我对总体形势的看法。谢谢大家。
It's a great remark. Thank you so much. Major General Nia just set up a framework, and he mentioned a lot of the times about the trend of the times, and he also mentioned about the 6 major changes. Ambassador Puja, I want to get your insights on the overall situation in Asia.
Thank you, Anpei. I'm so thrilled with the big and huge audience today in this room. And thank you so much for this opportunity. What I see, and I think General already mentions about, look at the situations, not as a half. I do agree that we look at the situation now in the Asia Pacific. It's not about the half empty or half full glass of water. But for us, it's actually how, not to debating those half empty or half full of the glass of the water, but how to find solutions, joint solutions together. Well, when I look at the current situation, of course, this is we are in the Asia and the Pacific is in the critical juncture. Of course, we look at the situations in this disruptive world now. Even we do not have predictions how our world will be in the future and how the future will be. Of course, the problems that we are having now in the Asia and the Pacific is a litmus test for our regions, but also for the international community. So that's why, of course, we are focusing more on how to find solutions. Because in our situations now, we are not only facing problems in which countries has conflicts with other countries, but also with regard to what is called the non-traditional security issues. So you can find so many non-traditional security threats that we are facing now: climate change, technology, the artificial intelligence, migrations, terrorism, etc. So that's also we need to focus with, in which those actually provides opportunity for member states in the Asia and the Pacific to work together to face these challenges, new challenges of the non-traditional security issues. The question is, with the current situation, whether we want to maintain the spirit of partnership in which we actually in the past, we enjoyed so much, which contributed actually to some extent peace in our regions, or we let the rivalry and conflicts and also competitions of major powers will be dragged on, and then this will deprive us from what we enjoyed in the past with regard to the peace. Well, of course, the leadership of China is mentioning about the 4 deficits: deficit of trust, deficits of peace, deficit of economics, and the deficit of development. And we are also recognizing another deficit in which the effectiveness mechanisms, a deficit in which the global multilateral institutions cannot actually solve particular conflicts even in our regions. So those we need to bridge, and those we need to actually settle those 4 deficits. And how, in particular, in this respect, especially from this forum, we can contribute the solutions. Then the deficit of trust and the deficit of peace and the shrinking of peace space can be overcome. Well, of course, the challenges in the future, whether we can create a new regional security architecture in this respect. But a lot of discussion on this, of course, especially in the Asia Pacific. And I think colleagues from this in this room already follow what the developments in our regions with regard to so many new mechanisms in our regions. The question is whether those mechanisms will contribute the peace that we enjoyed in the past, the region, or even this might be provoking another action and reactions in the future. So I believe in this juncture, so we need a strong, united global leadership. I believe we can find those solutions, and also to strengthen multilateral mechanism. So I believe, and conclude my remarks in this respect, that we need to reaffirm the principles of common security and common prosperity for our region. Thank you.
Mr. Puja, I want to make a comment, a follow-up with your question. You probably want to...
Yeah. 刚才大使先生讲了这个他的一些这个看法，我很认同啊。这个大使先生讲到是吧？这个我们应该找到解决这些安全问题的这个办法是吧？特别是一些非传统安全的一些个办法，因为这个大使先生也讲到中国的一些主张是吧？中国的这些解决安全问题上和全球问题上，我们说是真正的多边主义是吧？还有开放的这个地区主义是吧？多边主义和地区主义有的问题要靠多边方式来解决，有一些问题它是需要双边的，或者是这个地区层面来解决，这个我都很这个认同啊。因为先生也提到是吧？我们也需要建立伙伴关系，特别是也有人发挥这个领导作用。我想这个东盟在有些地方在有些问题上，实际上就发挥了这个领导作用。中国也积极参加东盟主导的一些这个安全对话的一些机制。中国我想是吧？如果在有些问题上我们能够发挥这个更大的作用，中国也非常愿意。谢谢。
So you talked about the
I
Chinese side.
just
Go ahead.
add a little bit on this. I believe our regions, the Southeast Asian regions, ASEAN, can also contribute to this, because from what we experienced in the past, we enjoyed a lot actually since the establishment of ASEAN since 1967. To some extent, we can contribute to peace and security in the bigger regions, the Asia and the Pacific. What we can contribute, what we can share from our experience in building peace and confidence in our region.
Well, yeah, I'm very curious about your institution, ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation. Can you tell us more about your institution? Do you tackle specific issues such as the South China Sea issue, which we cannot avoid in Asia today?
Well, elaborating on my institution probably takes 2 days discussion. Probably I'm not doing this. Just very brief actually. Because of the mandate, we cannot actually to touch upon particular issues. Of course, we are governed by 10 ASEAN countries in that respect. But on our mandate, research and capacity building, probably, and I said probably in the future, we can also touch upon the conflicts, the situations in particular in our regions. This gave a leverage to the, not our institution only, but also other institutions to support and to contribute to solving the regional situations in our region. Thank you.
Major General Ye, do you have anything to follow up? I want to learn more about China's stance in terms of the situation in the region.
You mean the South China Sea region?
Including the South China Sea region.
Yeah. 南海问题是亚太地区一个非常敏感的这个问题，南海地区也是一个非常这个敏感的地区这个现在应该说南海地区应该说是保持了总体的这个稳定，是吧？但是呢，这个也有一些我觉得值得关注或者值得警惕的一些这个情况，是吧？这个我就不说别的了我就举其中一个例子，比如说我们中国和菲律宾的这个关系。我这里今天我们的代表有没有来自我们菲律宾的这个代表，是吧？这个我前不久参加了东盟地区论坛的安全政策会议，也跟我们菲律宾方面的代表做过一些这个交流。我说怎么看这个问题这个大家很关心这个问题所以我在这个地方呢是多讲几句。我绝对没有说要挑起对抗和冲突的意思在里头，我是觉得我们一定要正视问题你要解决问题的话，你不能装作没有问题要解决问题就必须正视问题这个现在应该说 我们这个中国和菲律宾的关系啊，应该历史得看，全面的看。我们回顾一下历史就可以看到，中国和菲律宾的关系啊，应该说是传统友好的历史非常悠久。我们在座的特别是我们中国的朋友都很知道，过去叫苏鲁国王和中国皇帝的故事，大家可能还看过这么一部电影。600多年前，菲律宾一个地区的国王就来到中国，但是特别不幸的是，他在中国在回去的路上去世了，所以他就埋在中国。现在如果你们到中国的德州去，中国一个地方，山东的一个城市叫德州，你们到德州去还可以看到苏鲁国王的墓地啊。如果你们这次参加香山论坛以后，是吧？如果有机会去的中国看一看，我这是作为一个推荐的这个一个景点，是吧？今年是菲律宾和中国建交第49个年头，明年是第50年了，啊，这个应该说50年来啊，中菲律宾的关系和中国的关系啊，有曲折，有波折，是吧？但是基本面和主流是友好合作，这个必须承认，是吧？但是我们也不能否定，是吧？有过一些波折。特别是所谓的南海仲裁案，大家都知道中国的立场，我就不说了。对中国和菲律宾的关系，确实造成了影响，但是这个影响很短暂。这个杜特尔特政府这个执政期间，中国和菲律宾的关系马上翻开了这个新的一页。用习主席的话讲是叫经历风雨，又见彩虹，所以就是说，中菲关系出现了政经两热，政治经济两方面都热这么一个良好的局面。但是大家看到现在，这个关系又发生了逆转了，特别是在这个南海问题上，是吧？所以就是这里边从正反两个方面的这个教训告诉我们，两国关系和平友好合作建立起来不容易，但是要破坏它，可能就是一夜之间。所以这个问题，我跟我们的菲律宾的朋友也交流过，我觉得我们要这个思考，什么最符合两国的利益。那么现在南海局势大家也看到了，包括中国和菲律宾的关系，是吧？我们不能回避这个问题，是吧？我们的外交部发言人也有各种表态，媒体上也有各种这个报道。是吧？我今天提的这个问题，也不是要挑起什么这个冲突和对抗，但是我们看到，是吧？到底是这个责任在哪一方？我个人觉得责任这个完全是在菲律宾方面。第一个问题，我在这也跟大家说一说，是吧？你比如说，在南海这个侵权挑衅问题上，一个仁爱礁。一个先民礁，是吧？仁爱礁的问题上，你说中菲之间本来达成了协议，就这个补给品的这个运输这个问题，人道主义这个运补的问题，但是菲律宾呢也做了承诺，可是他现在违反了这个承诺，违反了双方这个协议，你说这是谁的责任？第二个，在先民礁的问题上，他现在又派海警船去。想复制这个仁爱礁的这个模式，长期的这个滞留，仁爱礁是中国的这个领土，而且退一步说，它也是一个无人岛屿。咱们都知道，那个南海各方行为宣言里明确提出来，这些要无人这个岛礁的问题上，要维持现状，保持稳定。你说是谁在破坏这个南海这个行为？宣言呢，是吧？我们可以看得很清楚其他的还有很多的表现，我就不说了在这个地方说起来，可能这个场合也不一定很合适，是吧？我就不讲了。所以我就说现在这个中菲关系也处在一个这个非常这个重要的这个十字关头这个一个重要的关节点，我们需要借鉴历史的经验和教训，妥善处理这个相关的这个问题 我们中国政府的这个观点非常明确：第一，如果有不法行径，我们一定会坚决回应，这个没有说的，这是我们的主权啊，这个核心的这个主权问题上的核心利益，我们必须维护。第二句话我们中国也说了，我们愿意坐下来，通过对话这个协商妥善处理这个可以解决分歧。所以这个问题呢，我的这个刚才记者先生提到这个南海问题，我们大使先生也讲到这个东盟在其中发挥的作用，是吧？我就顺着这个话题啊，这个多讲几句。
Ambassador Puja, do you think that's a deficit of trust when it comes to the South China Sea? Because both of you mentioned about we need to have a peaceful negotiation, we need to talk about cooperation rather than conflict. Do you think the action of unilaterally claiming Reef Island a way of promoting peace?
Well, as I said, South China Sea is one of the litmus tests of our regions, ASEAN in this respect. I believe this is also the litmus test of China on this very issue. In particular, when we look at the perspective of the ASEAN centrality, of course, this very issue on the South China Sea is a complex convergence. So between legal, political, economic, and strategic, even geopolitical and geoeconomics perspective. So some said that this is kind of a perfect storm of those perspectives. I mean, if we can look at the issue itself as a case which related to territorial disputes, of course, this involves very highly political and also intense national emotions. So I believe it's whatever the development later on, if this involves the high intense national emotions, this will not contribute to the conducive for the compromise base for the agreement that might be achieved in the future. Because when we look at the situation, in particular how the efforts between ASEAN and China to conclude the code of conduct, for example, this is something that's really important step that both parties need to achieve in the future. Because if we cannot solve this issue, this will bring probably attention and intentions of other major powers to also look at this, because this is like a magnet drawing attentions of powers beyond the regions. Secondly, if you look at back on the process of the declarations of conduct on the South China Sea, back to the year 2002. Now we have 2024. It has been more than 20 years now of the declaration of conduct. But can we see any progress on the ground in this respect after 20 years, more than 20 years of the declaration of conduct? Of course, on the negotiation table, there was a somewhat progress, first on the establishment of the guidelines and also the establishment of another agreements prior to the COC itself. But I believe code of conduct should be expressing the rules of the roads and what actually ASEAN and China want to to achieve in the future. I know this is not something easy to achieve. There was back and forth efforts because of the such situations on the ground which not actually conducive to the conclusions of the code of conduct. So in this respect, I still believe in good faith, in the negotiations. But if we still, prior to the conclusion of the COC, but if the spirit of the DOC on self-restraints, I think this is something that we can support and we can contribute to maintain peace and stability in our regions. Thank you.
I want to shift to another new topic because Ambassador Puja just mentioned about ASEAN centrality, the spirit of when it comes to disputes, all the relevant countries work together without the foreign interference. We have to talk about foreign interference when it comes to Asia Pacific. Major General Nie, what do you think of the current presence of NATO as well as AUKUS in the Asia Pacific?
召集者老问一些我不想谈的这个话题啊，是吧？为什么不想谈呢？我想了想，是吧？北约也好啊，还有其他域外国家也好，我个人感觉在亚太地区没有发挥这个很好的作用啊。用这个英语说，没有太多的好消息。 好像这个坏消息比较多，所以我就不太想谈这个话题哈。这个我觉得影响亚太地区的一个很重要的一个因素啊，我个人感觉啊，这是完全是我个人的看法啊，就是域外一些这个国家的这个对这个地区的一些事务的干涉，这是一个很重要的这个方面。 我说的域外国家呢，这个词本身也是很难确定的啊。咱们大家在座的，什么是叫亚太地区？亚太地区包括哪些国家？什么是域外？什么是域内？恐怕每个人有不同的这个看法啊。我记得我在澳大利亚上学的时候，我们老师就跟我们讲，怎么理解亚太地区啊？政治上是这么理解的，你要从经济上又是另外一种理解。 从地理上还有一种理解，可以有各种各样的理解。所以我说的域外国家是一个比较模糊的这么一个概念啊，不是具体是哪一个国家啊。但是我总感觉域外国家对亚太地区的这个干预啊，应该说是我们值得警惕的一个问题。现在这个亚太地区各种各样的这个集团啊，这个我们叫小圈子是吧？这个可能西方叫志愿者，这个什么啊，志同道合者这个联盟是吧？不管这什么叫法，各种各样的这种集团呐，在这个出现是吧？有的是双边的，有的呢是这个三边的，还有的是这个四边的，还有的是多边的。 是吧？有的呢是这个性质呢是军事同盟的这个性质，是吧？有的性质呢可能是一种，是吧？主要是一种政治啊、安全方面的这种这个关系啊，比较松散的这种关系，不是同盟，是吧？这个有的呢是就某一个具体议题，比如说情报分享，是吧？就这一些议题组建的一些这个集团，是吧？这个。 所以就在中国有很多这个说法是吧？叫这个包括北约是吧？在在亚洲啊搞一些类似北约的这样一些这个小北约这样一些这个集团是吧？域外国家的这种随着这个集团的这种建立，那么域外一些国家就逐渐给他们插手亚太事务，就提供了很多的这个平台机制。 给他们提供了这样的一些这个机会啊。现在这个很多的这个域外国家，包括有的是不远千里的国家，是吧？也派那么一艘船，是吧？2艘船的，时不时的到亚太地区来这个转一圈，说是亚太什么安全也是他们的关切，也是他们的安全关切，也和他们的安全息息相关啊。我想呢，就是这样一些这个行为对亚太地区的这个安全只会有破坏性的这个影响。他们来的目的实际上这个不是为了友好合作，而是为了这种有时候某种意义上像是一种带有这个把自己的意志强加于人的这种强权政治的含义在里头，是吧？打造这个集团的目的是为了进行这个实施这种强权的这个政治，把自己的意志强加于亚太地区，或者把自己的意志强加给中国他们的这个目的是这个。我这里边的危害这个我们不能小看。我随便举几个危害。第一，会不会削弱这个地区的战略互信？因为亚太地区很大，是吧？国家也很多，发展水平、这个经济和社会制度、意识形态还有历史文化都不相同。本来亚太国家之间，它的这个战略互信就不是很足。那么你外面的人一搅和，是吧？一煽动，很有可能这个战略互信就更加这个弱化。这是我举个例子。再比如说，那会不会挑起这个冲突升温？你到南海来，或者是到台海去，或者是到其他地区去，这地方本来就是一些地区热点问题那么这么外来势力一干预，这个热点就有可能升温。本来热点可以管控好，但是受到外部实力的这个煽动、纵容和干涉以后，那么地区局势就有可能升级为危机甚至有可能是冲突甚至我觉得在某些特殊情况下都不能排除说战争的可能性，对吧？所以就是这是一个很大的危害。再比如说，我再举个这个它的一个这个影响，是吧？你说军备竞争，我用竞争这个词儿还是比较缓和的，应该甚至某种意义上讲，还对军备竞赛，对吧？这个担忧。现在大家都知道，亚太地区很多国家都在提高国防预算呢。你们查一查今年的国防预算，有的都是超历史记录对吧？逐年的这个增长武器向其他地区的购买武器发展有的是在部署这个什么军事力量加强这个基础亚太的这个基础的这个建设包括基地的建设部署这个加强这个力量的这个部署加强能力的这个发展你说这能不能叫军备竞赛？我不敢说，但是军事竞争是肯定在这个加速，是吧？这些影响，我是说，是吧？我们不能这个低估，不能这个小看，是吧？当然我们还有很多别的问题，比如说会不会加重我们亚太地区本来就有的，是吧？一些这个非传统安全问题，由于外来势力的干涉。是吧？本来好多传统问题这个应该说可以得到控制，可以得到管控，但是你想这个什么恐怖主义是吧？还有一些这个像这个网络跨国犯罪等等还有这个这样一些非传统的安全威胁，是吧？它也会随着外来势力的干预进一步这个加重和这个加剧。我简单的举这么一些这个例子跟大家这个说一说，对它的亚太地区安全的影响，我觉得不能这个低估，是吧？可能我说这个话，有的人又不太爱听，是吧？但是这个记者先生给我提出了这个问题，是吧？我就讲一讲。
Well, there's certainly a lot of questions we should address on. I want to ask the one last question to both of the two guests. Starting from you, Ambassador Puja. We talked about several disputes. We also talk about prosperity and peaceful development in Asia Pacific. When it comes to dialogue and negotiation as well as future peace negotiations, what kind of spirit should we uphold?
Well, I think it's very much also related to your previous questions to the generals. I mean, and I'm also trying to repeat what I mentioned in the beginning of my remarks, whether we would like to have confirmations from all the member states in this respect to continue strengthening the spirit of partnership among the member states, or we will allow the rivalry, the competitions of major powers in our regions. In this respect, what I would like to underline actually, because at this juncture, we're still experiencing of lacking of trust. The trust deficit is still there, you like it or not. So in this respect, why this current of circumstances occur, whether you think what this situation will contribute to the peace and stability in the regions, or on the other side of the coin, or provoking another kind of competition. And in this respect, whether this effort is to increase the leverage vis-a-vis others. Of course, what we actually wish to, again, to witness is everybody should restrain themselves. In this current of situations, in this current of uncertainty, which I believe will create not only misperceptions, but also miscalculations. That's what very much we are concerned.
Sure.
So reduce the tensions, and I believe improve the CBM. CBM is not about continental ballistic missiles, but confidence building measures in this respect.
Thank you very much. We're running out of time. Major General Nie, one last comment. What's your take on the China stance when it comes to security in Asia Pacific? 很快。
好，三句话吧。第一句话呢，我觉得这个中国的亚太安这个自己啊，坚定走和平发展的道路啊，我们要成为亚太这个安全力量的这个坚定的是吧？亚太安全的坚定的这个维护者啊，这是我们要把自己的事情做好。这个刚才大石先生提到是吧？也有人在维护亚太安全当中发挥啊这个领导作用。我们中国，我们不应该叫领导作用，是吧？我想我们中国说我们要发挥这个表率作用，啊，发挥这个示范作用，这是我想第一个。第二一个，中国人要以自己的这个要坚持共同合作、综合、可持续的安全观，就是中国不仅仅这个谋求自身的安全，中国也要谋求整个地区所有国家的安全。我们认同安全不可分割的原则，对所有国家的安全关系，我们都合理的安全关系，我们都是尊重。第三一个，我觉得就是亚太安全的这个维护啊，是一个综合问题，涉及到方方面面。比如说刚才大石先生提到，我们没有互信，我们要建立好互信，是吧？我前面还提到了很多的这个别的，我们要加强合作，是吧？我们要这个大家这个同舟共济，是吧？这个携起手来解决这个地区安全问题。但是我觉得有一个最低的这个底线，就是要先把冲突和分歧控制好，这是个底线，不要让冲突和分歧和这个分歧啊升级为危机、冲突和战争。先守住底线，然后我们再追求更高的目标。谢谢。
Thank you very much. I think it's the time to cherish the wisdom that Asia Pacific is having to further build the prosperity and security. Thank you to our both guests, Ambassador Buja as well as Major General Nie. Thank you very much. 45 minutes is short. There's so much to talk about. So if you stay in this room, following up is the conversation on China-U.S. ties brought by my colleague Liu Xin. See you soon.
尊敬的各位来宾，大会将在5分钟后开始，请您尽快就座，并将手机等通讯设备置于静音状态。谢谢合作。Distinguished guests, our conference will start in 5 minutes. Please be seated and mute your mobile phones and other electronic devices. Thank you for your cooperation. 尊敬的来宾，请注意置于座椅上的同传设备。频道1为中文频道，频道2为英语频道。如果同传设备故障，请到位于会场后方的同传设备更换处更换。会议结束后，请将同传设备放置在座椅上。谢谢。Distinguished guests, there are simultaneous interpretation devices on your seats. Channel 1 is for Chinese and Channel 2 is for English. If you have any problem with the interpretation devices, please ask the staff at the back of the hall for help. At the end of the conference, please leave your interpretation devices on your seats. Thank you very much. 尊敬的各位来宾，大会即将开始，请您尽快就座，并将您的手机等通讯设备置于静音状态。谢谢合作。Distinguished guests, the conference will start soon. Please be seated and set your mobile phones and other communication devices to the silent mode. Thank you for your cooperation. 有请主持人主持会议。
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Haven't seen such a packed house for a long time. So It's really different from hosting on TV, where you sit in a small studio and talk to a camera and imagine that there are real people behind it. And today we see a lot of real people, so it's very different. There's a vibe in the room. And Professor Anthony, welcome to the. Professor Anthony is looking for a seat. Can someone help him? Good to see you. It's great to see you. So I just want to make sure that we're all seated as soon as possible. And this is special. By the way, this is a great privilege for me to be hosting this, and we're going to record this and make it into a complete episode for my show, which is called The Point with Liu Xin, an opinion show on CGTN. My colleague Zhao Yunfei just now did a wonderful job, but this time we are going to record it and put it on the social media on YouTube, so I hope that we will have your support and cooperation. If you still have your phone ringing, on the ringing mode, please help me put it on silent mode. Don't kill it. You don't need to switch it off. Just put it on silent mode. And refrain from walking around, especially in front of the cameras. I see a lot of cameras being blocked, kind of. I hope you find your position. Where's my camera? My camera is there. So our friends, whoever is standing there or maybe passing back and forth over there, please make sure that my face will appear on air. All right. So without much ado, let's get started. I'm really excited. And I hope you find your seat, gentlemen. Is there not possible? We're so popular, maybe. Is there a way to find some extra seats for our distinguished guests here, for the organizers? Or maybe you probably have to squeeze like the other people during at the aisles, but not in the middle of the aisle, because there are a lot of cameras right behind you. So I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you. We'll still give you a little bit of time to figure that out. Squeeze. Asia Pacific. There is enough space. Sitting on the floor? No, maybe not. There are some empty seats here, gentlemen. If you want to use some seats there for the moment, you can. Yeah. And Yunfei, make a seat for the guest. Yeah, thank you. The more the merrier. Yeah, thank you for bearing with us a little bit. Are we all set? You still see a couple of more. Okay, one more there. Gentlemen. Yeah, please grab whichever seat that is there. Thank you so much. So this one is going to be about China-US relations, and of course I'm sure you've already recognized the guests that are sitting with me on stage. I don't need much introduction, but let me do that anyway. I have Mr. Wu Xingbo, who is Professor and Dean of the Institute of International Studies at Fudan University, and Rick Waters, Managing Director of Eurasia Group's China practice. He previously served as Assistant Secretary of State and head of the Office of China Coordination in the Biden administration. A warm round of applause to both my guests. Welcome. And I'm going to start the recording now, and I'll do a leading, and then we go into the program. Leaders from global military and defense departments, heads of international organizations, and renowned experts are gathering in Beijing for the 11th Beijing Xiangshan Forum. With discussion centered around global security and defense, the evolving nature of China-US relations is a key focus. During a meeting with U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in August, Chinese President Xi Jinping said the two countries need to first and foremost find a good answer to the overarching question, are China and the United States rivals or partners? Clearly, the answer from China is partners, But the US seems to have made up its mind that China is a rival. Without a consensus, where is this relationship heading? What can be done to make sure that things don't spiral out of control? Welcome to a special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you from Beijing at the Xiangshan Forum. I'm pleased to be joined here on site by Wu Xinbo, Professor and Dean of the Institute of International Studies at Fudan University, and Rick Waters, Managing Director of Eurasia Group's China Practice, previously Assistant Secretary of State and Head of the Office of China Coordination in the Biden administration. The warmest welcome, and thank you to being on the point. And of course, we have a packed house today with all the participants to the forum, all the wonderful participation, and thank you very much for being with us today. Without much ado, let's go to the very important question. So, China President Xi says the most important thing, the first and foremost, is to define, to have the strategic perception of rivals and or partners. For China, this is first and foremost. Mr. Waters, for the United States, is it? If not, what is the first and foremost in this relationship?
Well, first off, thank you. It's great to be here. It's good to see that U.S.-China relations attracts no interest from anyone.
Sorry?
It's a very popular panel today. And I think we need to think a little bit about the framing of your question. I think it's an important issue in the U.S.-China relationship. I think for most U.S. officials, for many U.S. academics, there's a different framework that we often use, and it starts less with the principles, and it starts more with specific policies. And so I think part of the challenge of saying that you have to have a correct perception is that even in the way the two countries think about the relationship, they use different frameworks for the discussion. So for the U.S., I think there is a framework, and that framework has evolved over the past several decades, and I think the newer framework is more or less set. It's a primarily competitive relationship, but I think we have to keep in perspective what that means. Competition is not always zero-sum.
Is competitiveness and rivalry the same thing in the United States mind?
Well, I think there are aspects of the relationship that are more adversarial. There are aspects that are competitive, and there are aspects where we have to, again, maintain perspective about the reality that no matter where U.S. and China relations are, the two countries have to find a way to work together on issues of global concern. So I think that's the framework that the current administration, and I think to some degree, recent administrations have used in thinking about U.S.-China ties today.
And Mr. Wu, why is China believing the right perception is the starting point of everything?
Well, I think the point here is that the way you define this relationship determines the approach you take to this relationship. If you define this relationship as more of a partner than rivalry or competitor, and then you are going to take a more cooperative approach to this relationship rather than a competitive or confrontation approach. So that is one reason why it is important. Secondly, even though the U.S. say, competition is the nature of this relationship, so competitive approach is necessary to China-U.S. relations. But from a Chinese perspective, competition is just let me put it this way, euphorism for containment and suppression. So when the U.S. uses the word compete, it goes far beyond that. If you look at the U.S. trade war, tech war, the U.S. sanctions on thousands of Chinese entities, look at the U.S. military activities around China, that's far more than competition. So why? Because I think for the U.S. policy elite, the definition of China is more than a competitor. a rival, sometimes an adversary, and even enemy. So that's a problem. That is why perception matters a lot.
That certainly is China's perception, and Mr. Waters, does Washington understand the Chinese perception that we just don't see how you can say a lot of things like don't seek to contain China, don't seek, to provoke, support our independence, for instance, and you're doing a whole host of things which will reinforce China's perception that this is precisely what you're seeking.
Well, I think that Washington officials, scholars who come and go, do have a fairly clear understanding of the Chinese view of these issues. But I think that's why I get back to the difference between viewing issues through the prism of perception and through specific policies. Because when you look at issues, for example, in this region, the U.S. and China have had a long-standing difference over the Taiwan issue, and yet the existing frameworks, as unsatisfying as they are, have actually, if we look at them objectively, given us 5 decades of an unhappy peace and stability. And so sometimes the reality is that these issues have to be managed in terms of looking at the specific policy actions and their implications, not just perception alone.
I understand. I think there is a big cultural, even civilizational difference here. And Mr. Waters, you speak Chinese very well. I'm sure you understand. For the Chinese, we say 家和万事兴, 和气生财. The atmosphere is like the water that's carrying everything. When the atmosphere is good, then everybody rises. But when the atmosphere is not right, then you cannot tackle the single issues and still hope this relationship to be long-term and sustainable. And I think that's what China is saying. But the United States seem not to agree to look at things this way. And you want to tackle specific issues, right?
Well, you probably have to do a bit of both, but I think my rusty Chinese, if I remember correctly, there's a saying, 听其言, 观其行.
You know that, sorry, the Chinese are saying this about the United States.
I also know English phrasing is talk the talk and walk the walk, right? I know President Biden has repeatedly reassured President Xi that the U.S. has no intention to support Taiwan independence, no intention to suppress China's development, blah, 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 blah. But if you look at the U.S. policy, it's quite a different story. So you talk the talk, but you walk a different walk. That's the problem.
You want to react?
Well, we can spend a lot of time on the Taiwan question. Professor Wu and I have had good discussions over the years. But look, let's talk about that for a second. I think that from the U.S. perspective, the policy towards the Taiwan issue is rooted in several foundational documents, the 3 joint communiques, the 1982 Taiwan Relations Act, and a series of assurances between the U.S. and Taiwan, as well as classified documents that were more recently declassified. And if you look at this as a body of policy, that framework has not changed. But what has changed in recent years, perhaps, is the evolution of politics on the island. What has changed in recent years are different perceptions between Beijing and Taipei. And I think between the 3 capitals, Beijing, Taipei, and Washington, what tends to happen on this issue is when they are acting completely at odds with each other, things can become unstable. But the core U.S. interest here, which is enshrined in all of those documents and legislation, is ultimately peace and stability. It is not to use Taiwan as an instrument of leverage in strategic competition. And this is why I think, President Biden has been very clear in his meetings that the U.S. does not support Taiwan independence, and that this is not a chip, a bargaining chip. The last thing I will say, though, is that in any government, you have inherent tensions between different aspects of your policy. And since the 1970s, the U.S. has also had an unofficial relationship with Taiwan, that's a very robust one. The bilateral trading relationship alone is bigger than U.S. trade with India. So we have to keep in mind that there will be a very robust relationship between the U.S. and Taiwan that operates largely independent of the questions of U.S. cross-strait policy.
Well, I think the most important and foundational understanding between China and U.S. on the Taiwan issue is the 3 communiques between our 2 countries. That's the Shanghai Communique, Normalization Communique, and August 17 Communique of 1982. And all the 3 documents stipulate that 2 things are important in this understanding. One China and peaceful solution of issue. So that's something the 2 governments worked out over the years. And for some time, Washington supported this position. But what we have seen in recent years, in the last 1 decade or so, is that the U.S. is becoming less sympathetic to the Chinese goal of peaceful reunification. At least many people in the U.S. would like to say the status quo continue, which means a de facto separation of 2 sides of the Taiwan Strait. And secondly, also more and more people in the U.S. strategic community is rediscovering the value of Taiwan in U.S. regional strategy to China, Indo-Pacific strategy to China. They think they can use Taiwan as an important instrument, leverage, to check and constrain China's growing influence in this region. So in that sense, that makes China feel that U.S. is no longer committed to the one China policy, and the U.S. is more and more encouraging Taiwan independence, either overtly or covertly. And also the U.S. is playing the card of Taiwan more and more against China in bilateral interactions. And as a result, China has to take actions to deal with this new reality. Yeah. So in international relations, you always have this action and reaction, this phenomenon.
Yeah, I think this question has been discussed so much, and so many times both sides have reiterated their stance, and yet things are going. We would have been developing, I wouldn't say to a tipping point, but it seems to be going in the wrong direction. What can both sides do, I'm going to ask this question, to contain the worsening or to reverse the worsening trend? Because Sullivan talks about wanting to see stability, wanting to be peacefulness at the Strait. China definitely wants peace. What can the 2 sides do?
Well, I think in a way, if we look at the last 2 years, there has been some modest progress. And what I mean by that is that I actually think the tensions between the U.S. and China over this issue peaked in 2022, around the time of former Speaker Pelosi's visit. And my sense, and again, I'm not speaking in an official capacity, but as an analyst, is that I think both sides realized things got a bit out of hand. They realized that if the U.S. and China are going to have conflict, it shouldn't be unintentional. And I think that's part of the dynamic that led to the Bali summit, which was the initial effort to build a floor between the 2 sides on some of these very sensitive issues. And that effort, as we know, it got interrupted in the spring of 2023 over the balloon incident. But eventually it started to gain traction slowly through the hard work of diplomacy, through senior level visits, Secretary Blinken, Secretary Yellen, and others. And by the time you got to the Woodside Summit last year, you had, among other things, the emergence of what the Chinese side calls a strategic channel between Jake Sullivan and Director Wang Yi. And what is that channel doing? It's not changing either side's general approach, but what it is doing, I think, is trying to better communicate the actual intentions trying to inject a measure of predictability. Because if you look back to the Taiwan elections in January, there were, and Jake has spoken publicly about this, there were some loose coordination on aspects of issues between the three major capitals, and elections in Taiwan came and went without major PLA activities and the like. So, this may sound unsatisfying, and it doesn't address the strategic concerns, but I think sometimes it's the modest but hard work of diplomacy that can at least achieve stabilization or predictability in some of these difficult areas between the two countries.
Mr. Wu, can these diplomatic steps alleviate the situation?
Well, they are helpful, but I think there is something more than that that should be done. Taiwan issue is not a small issue. It's not a tactical issue. It requires political wisdom and strategic judgment. Just like, when Nixon and Kissinger reached out to China, we negotiated for the One China agreement. So that was political decision, that was a strategic decision. And today, we need once again this kind of decision. So I would say 3 steps should be taken in moving in the right direction. First, let's close the door for Taiwan independence. Taiwan independence is just a dead end. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen at all, right? So if it tries, it's going to be disastrous for all sides. So foreclose the option for Taiwan independence. Second step is that how all the sides, Beijing, Washington, and even Taipei, can work to create an environment that's favorable to the ultimate peaceful reunification. So that's something actually in the 1980s, I think the 3 sides thought about this very seriously for a while. Today, we should come back to this trajectory. Okay, how we can facilitate the process of peaceful reunification. The third step is that finally, it takes the 2 sides of Taiwan Strait to sit down for negotiations. Okay, and U.S. is not going to be at the negotiating table. But of course, the U.S. is very important in shaping an environment that's conducive to the ultimate peaceful reunification. So I think we need this kind of political and strategic decision, and then we can reverse the current negative trend in the Taiwan Strait. What worries me most at the moment is that all the 3 sides today are making preparation for the worst case scenario. That's very dangerous. So how can we reverse this negative momentum and try to once again put this issue on the right track? That's a challenge for us.
I guess that's why the presence of Mr. Waters is particularly important here, because you are showing that there are people in the United States who care about this relationship, who want to be in China and talk to us and help us understand exactly what's on the mind of the U.S. Policymakers. I do want to mention this because just a couple of days ago, when the U.S. lawmakers came back from their summer holidays, they celebrated the China Week. And I mean it in a sarcastic way, of course. I'm sure you've read the news. At least 21 to 22 bills directly targeting China were tabled and passed, I believe, at the House of Representatives. A busy week, yeah, and very productive week for U.S. lawmakers. A crazy week, okay. Busy, crazy. Of course, not very happy on the Chinese end. How should we understand that? How damaging is it going to be U.S.-China relationship? This is not the White House who make the distinction. These are the lawmakers, and mostly Republicans, who tabled these bills, but Democrats went along and passed these bills.
Well, I think we have to look at the underlying concerns. You remember the House of Representatives, which is the closest in U.S. democracy to the American people. they tend to reflect the concerns that have been growing in several areas. Security issues are one, and we'll talk about that today, but I think for most ordinary Americans, it centers more around issues that touch their lives, and I think that would break out into two broad things. One is the reality that for many parts of the U.S. over the past 20 years, a combination of the China shock, China's entry into the WTO, automation, and other factors have decimated parts of the traditional U.S. manufacturing base. You also have the scourge of fentanyl, which is a synthetic opioid that is very difficult to control because the precursors are produced in small quantities, and unlike cocaine, can be shipped into the U.S. in small batches, but at devastating effect. And it's very difficult to underestimate the impact of these trends in U.S. politics. So when you come back to China Week, you know, when the House formed its select committee, which does, I think, represent a broad bipartisan consensus about the challenges in many of these areas, security, economics, and society, including domestic influence questions. That has started to lead to legislation meant to address many of these issues. Now, I'll say, you know, Congress, especially the House, passes a lot of things that never actually find their way into formal legislation. But I do think that some of what we will see, some of what we have seen eventually will. And those could include things like reducing the de minimis level of goods that can come into the U.S. without tariffs, because that loophole has created a whole economy of circumvention of the market access barriers that existed in the past. I think you're going to see more adjustments of technology controls that reflect national security concerns, particularly in areas such as biotech. So I do think more is coming, but I think that is still different in my view from a decoupling, because today as we sit here, the U.S. and China still have a $575 billion bilateral trading relationship. It will shrink, but it won't disappear.
So you were talking about, you know, the bill supposedly reflecting the aspirations of the constituencies of the voters, but some of these bills are like drones, you know, biotechnology. What are the average American girls and pals? How much are they affected by high-end Chinese drones? And that's why China is not very happy about it, first of all. And secondly, do these lawmakers really believe in the security threats these technologies may pose?
Well, I think many of them do, but I think we have to be objective about this. I mean, so do many people here. The fundamental concerns about data security are present in both countries. I mean, in some ways, I think the data security regimes developed more quickly in China than they did in the U.S. And so, you know, I think that does matter to ordinary Americans in the sense that debates about TikTok and the algorithm, debates about privacy,
even U.S. presidential candidates are using TikTok. Certainly they're not concerned about data security there.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying that the policy is entirely coherent. I mean, part of the beauty and the messiness of democracy is that you will go through these debates about how do you balance questions of security with openness, with First Amendment rights to free speech. And there are no easy answers, which is why I think a lot of these bills will emerge. They may be voted on, but they may never pass into law. But I do think they're reflective of these core underlying concerns that I've outlined in the broader U.S.-China debate.
Mr. Wu, what will be the effect of such bills and such China Week sensation among the Chinese, general public, and industries?
Well, you just mentioned that these congressmen, their behaviors now represent do not necessarily represent the White House, right? Well, I think you are trying to make a distinction without much difference, in my opinion. Because why, Congress, they are not necessarily self-mobilized on China. Of course, senators, congressmen, they have their own political agenda. But at the same time, they also look at what the president says, what the Secretary of State says about China. So when the president and the Secretary of State go out in public and say China is America's primary strategic competitor, China is America's most serious geopolitical challenge, and we got to, we ought to outcompete China. We need to, restrict the investment in China and also Chinese investment in the U.S. What kind of message are you sending to Congress? So in that sense, I think that the executive branch really shapes the environment in which Congress thinks about their China agenda. So that's one point I want to make. Secondly, what will be impact on Chinese public? Well, we all have the impression that U.S. Congress is more often than not a major troublemaker when it comes to China-U.S. relations. Look at the facts since 1979, starting with the Taiwan Relations Act, right? They played some useful roles sometimes, but to be fair, overall, Congress has been more negative than positive on relations with China. Maybe largely because of their narrowly defined political agenda back at home. But still, I recall in 1990s when the Clinton administration advocated for the policy of strategic engagement with China, many Congress people come to visit China. I used to escort about 20 senators and congressmen for 1 week trip to China. They visit Shanghai, Beijing, taken to the Yangtze River to visit three projects. So that was how the executive branch can shape the agenda, the China agenda for the Congress. Today, people think, Congress is the most vocal and hostile voice against China in the United States. They are not only passing a lot of bills against China, which come into law later on, but also they are poisoning the atmosphere for China-U.S. relations. And also, it's fair to say sometimes they even exert pressure on the executive branch, not allowing the Biden administration to engage with China, not to stabilize relations with China. In their opinion, that's appealing. So in that sense, Congress today is very much a liability to a good China-U.S. relationship.
One important thing is what will it take for things to change, at least for the lawmakers? What do they care about? For instance, jobs, for instance, benefits from trading with China. There has been tremendous benefit from trading with China, while China benefited as well. What are they looking for?
Well, I think in a nutshell, it's changes in aspects of Chinese policy. And I go back to something that Professor Wu said. I agree with you that when members of Congress have come to China, that has sometimes had a very constructive effect. And let's look at the issue of fentanyl. Senator Chuck Schumer came here recently on a bipartisan delegation, met with the leadership. They had constructive exchanges behind closed doors about U.S. concerns. And I think that visit and the discussions with the leadership here and the subsequent resumption of coordination between Chinese law enforcement and U.S. drug agencies has played a stabilizing role on that issue. I could imagine a world in which, had that not happened, there would have been voices in Congress who were looking to sanction Chinese entities, or perhaps even the law enforcement structures themselves. And yet we ended up with a very different outcome. And so I think it goes back to this question of, yes, the perceptions are important. And I'm here partly because I think it's important for all of us to listen to these concerns about perceptions. But ultimately, I think what members of Congress are looking for is changes in specific policy.
China has made it very clear and repeatedly its position, its consistent position. I'm going to quote President Xi of what he said to Mr. Sullivan during his meeting in August 29th. And if you check the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website of this particular report, you'll find it very interesting, the picture that's put there. You don't see that picture very often. President Xi's smiling, and Jake Sullivan is pulling a very, I would say, neutral face. You know, that picture says a lot, I think, about what China wants to send to the world through this picture and through this meeting. And in that meeting, President Xi reiterated 4 points that are unchanged in China's U.S. policy. Number 1, China's commitment to the goal of a stable, healthy, sustainable relationship. Number 2, the principle of handling this relationship based on mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation. Number 3, its position on firmly safeguarding the country's sovereignty, security, and development interests. Number 4, its efforts to carry forward the traditional friendship between the peoples of the two countries. So what does President Xi want to tell the American people and the world by highlighting the 4 unchanged? And in such order, you know, China's commitment to the goal of a stable, healthy, sustainable relationship remains unchanged. What else needs to be said to persuade, to tell the American people and politicians that we are sincere, that we want this relationship to work?
Well, I don't think that the current administration has ever doubted President Xi's sincerity. In fact, I think for President Biden, who is the American who has spent more time with him than anyone else, they got to know each other when they were vice presidents. They spent time together in parts of the country just to know each other as people. I don't have any doubt about that. I think I'll leave it to Chinese officials to characterize what the intent of those messages is. But I did want to capture one important point that we haven't talked about yet. There are very consequential policy differences between the two sides. But in many areas, these have been manageable in part because the connections between the two societies were robust. And I worry a lot about what has happened since the period of COVID and beyond, the collapse in connection between the societies. I mean, in the last decade, typically 15,000 American students would come here every year. Now the number is under 1,000. And the reasons for this are complex and not entirely political. But I think the 4th point is an important one, and actually a very important part of the Woodside consensus, that it takes an active effort to keep the societies connected. Otherwise, if you lose that piece, it complicates everything else.
Mr. Wu, you used to have American teachers in your classroom. What is the situation now, if we talk about people-to-people exchange?
Well, this semester on our campus, Fudan University, we have several thousand international students returning to campus, coming from Asia, Europe, Africa, but still very few from the United States. So that's not because of the Chinese policy, because our policy towards international students are the same. The Asian students, European students, African students are coming back. Why the American students are slow to come back? Just look at the State Department travel alert regarding China, right? China is still dangerous for you guys to travel to. I talked to the American students, if they want to come to China, their overseas student office will tell them, look at the travel a lot on State Department website. You should not go. You should go to Japan. You should go to South Korea. And also the parents feel nervous. I think the problem is that the current U.S. administration and its policy actually does not encourage the resumption of people-to-people exchanges, in spite of what they said in rhetoric. So that's the problem. And actually, I think that the American universities, they have been working very hard to pressure the State Department to adjust its policy. But it's not working well. It's not working well. Let me go back to your earlier question about President Xi's message to the U.S. I think this delivers two important messages. Is that A, China's position on relation with the U.S. has not changed. We still prefer a cooperative, stable, mutually beneficial relationship with the United States. Two, this relationship should be principled. Our policy towards the U.S. should be principled. We have some important principle for this relationship dating back to the Shanghai Communique when it comes to the Taiwan issue. So we are not going to compromise our major principles, our major interests for the sake of China-U.S. relations. I think these are two important messages. Now, for the U.S., I think that the U.S. has not been consistent in relations with China, especially since the Trump administration. They changed their mind about what kind of relationship they want to have with China. Secondly, as the U.S. is defining China more and more as a strategic rivalry, they are actually undermining, challenging, damaging Chinese interests in economic, technological, financial, geopolitical, and security areas. That's a problem for this relationship.
Mr. Waters, you want to react? I know you don't speak on behalf of the U.S. government, but if you want to react, you're perfectly welcome to do that. Otherwise, China has actually sent a message, and I understand that through the four unchanged, China welcomes a good relationship with the United States, and a good relationship with the United States is based on a United States that's successful as well. That's my understanding.
Well, I think that's a good aspirational goal. But again, the challenge comes back to practical policies. And I would say, I would focus on 2 points. One is, in this region, seen from the U.S., but not just the U.S., from Tokyo, from Seoul, from Manila, people are watching the greatest military buildup in history. The world's largest navy, the world's largest coast guard, the expansion of a nuclear arsenal with a lack of transparency that leads to questions about intent. And so it's understandable at a certain level why the specific actions related to the buildup of the PLA and its modernization are creating fears in other capitals. And this is leading to two broad dynamics. It's leading them to seek greater security between each other and to repurpose aspects of their traditional alliances with the U.S. as a hedge. And so I think that the realities, as I see in this region, are very complicated, and it goes beyond intentions to misperception and effect. The second thing is that, again, for most political officials I have worked for, what they care about is what matters to their ordinary voters. And we are also seeing at the same time an historic level of imbalance in the Chinese economy, with savings that have nowhere to go except productive capacity. That productive capacity is now spilling across borders at a scale that is far different than it was 10 or 20 years ago. And the result is that Protectionism, market access is on the rise, and the trading structures, the security structures are weakening. And so I think that we have to remind ourselves of those realities as we think about how to move towards the aspirational framings that we've talked about here.
Okay, now we've come to the economic and trade relationship. I understand you're talking about overcapacity and so on and so forth.
I avoided the word. Did you see that?
I know, but you meant it, and I picked it up. Mr. Wu.
Well, I want to take a different look at the situation in regional security. I mean, if you compare China with the U.S., China since late 1970s has not been involved in any major military conflict with any of our neighbors. So this is a major power that has not been involved in a military conflict or in a war for many decades, while at the same time its national capability has achieved historically unprecedented growth. This is quite rare in human history. So that tells China's intention. That means China really wants to have a peaceful environment in which it can continue to develop and prosper. So that's the intention. This intention is very clear. Same time, if you look at the U.S. record in the last 4 decades, how many wars the U.S. has been involved in all parts of the world, right? Iraq, Afghanistan, Middle East, I mean everywhere. So how can you tell me that U.S., with this kind of record, you just come to this region and work for peace for the region? I just don't believe it. I mean, the facts don't, buy this logic. The reason why China has to build up its military capability, because we are confronting a very complicated security environment. Look at the South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, East China Sea. Since the U.S. rebalanced Asia strategy, we know what the U.S. has been doing in this region. So we need to develop the capability to deal with a growingly complicated security environment. And then secondly, because of our economic growth, we have more capability. We have more resources to devote than in the past. That's another reason. Above all, I think whether or not a country wants peace or not is not because of its capability, but because of its intention. I think China's intention remains to seek for a peaceful environment in which China can continue to develop and rise. I believe that.
And probably benefit as well. We definitely benefit from this relationship. But following up on Mr. Wu's comment, they're saying that, the United States has been bringing wars everywhere. China, this region is by and large peaceful. There's more to celebrate than there is to be worried about, as our previous distinguished speakers put it. Does it mean that China wants the United States hands off in the Asia Pacific?
The U.S. has been a dominant actor in Asia Pacific since the end of World War II. So like it or not, that is the reality. That's a starting point when we look at the regional geopolitical situation. So China is not that naive that we hope that one day when we get up in the morning and American soldiers are gone, American military bases in this region are closed. That's not going to happen. We want to see the U.S. to stay in this region to play a constructive and peaceful role for this region, not impose its own narrowly defined security agenda on this region. And the problem is now, as we can tell, the U.S. in this region, they want to pursue a security agenda featured with containing China or quietly competing with China. That is why the U.S. allies and partners in this region have been mobilized. They joined the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy to deal with China. That's something China does not like to see it happen. That's something China has to deal with it, like or not.
Mr. Water, you want to wrap up there, and while responding to that, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, essentially what we're talking about, though, is a very different view of the risks of conflict and the rules in this region. I mean, we haven't really talked about some of the actual points of friction beyond Taiwan, but, I think for the U.S., these alliance relationships that predate the period of strategic competition, part of the reason that the U.S. is concerned about Chinese actions in the region is a very different view of the rules. And the previous panel talked a bit about the situation in the South China Sea, where under any definition of UNCLOS, the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea.
Don't mention that, because the United States is not party to it.
You are right, and I'll be the first to admit that. The U.S. has selectively embraced these rules over the years, but the reality is that if we choose not to go by UNCLOS, what is the alternative set of rules? Because if UNCLOS is the accepted rule book, low tide elevations don't generate territorial entitlements, and therefore they can't form the basis of any country's sovereign claims. And that's, I think, why the U.S. view generally tends to focus on concerns about China changing aspects of this international rules-based order. You are absolutely right. We tend to not be introspective about when we ourselves have failed to do that. But I'm not sure that it moves us closer to responsible management of these issues to simply dig in on our respective positions all the time. We have to view each side's position and try to understand why the intentions are as they are.
Mr. Wu, wrap up 1 minute, please.
Well, I think the South China Sea dispute has been there for decades, and is likely to be there for several decades in the future. And at the end of the day, it's up to China and other direct disputants, claimants, to negotiate for a peaceful settlement of this issue. And before that, we need to find a way to manage the situation, not allow this issue to, break up. And in this process, the role the U.S. can play, as I can see today, the so-called the U.S. military's freedom of navigation action doesn't help at all in solve the problem or manage the problem. So in that sense, I think the most important thing for the U.S. to do is to stay out of this issue and encourage all sides to cool down, to negotiate, to compromise. So that's my ending point.
Thank you so much. We're going to wrap up there. I believe this conversation can go on and on for hours, because for every issue there is so much to talk about. I would, a warm round of applause to my distinguished panelists. Thank you so much for such an insightful conversation. And my take, if that's worth anything, is when the water rises, everybody's rise. When the atmosphere is better, it's better to talk about and maybe sort out any issue, if at all. Many thanks once again to Wu Xingbo, Professor and Dean of the Institute of International Studies at Fudan University, and Rick Waters, Managing Director of Eurasia Group's China Practice. And with that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As usual, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Li Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point, and a big round of applause to all our attendees today. Thank you so much for being with us.
12点出现。所以现在这次休息的喂，我收讯不好，喂，等一下会到12点左右，然后中午会休息。对，然后你现在可以看刚才的画面。对，没错，对，谢谢。好，拜拜。
将在10分钟后开始，请您尽快就座，并将手机等通讯设备置于静音状态。谢谢合作。Distinguished guests, our conference will start in 10 minutes. Please be seated and mute your mobile phones and other electronic devices. Thank you for your cooperation. 尊敬的各位，尊敬的来宾，请注意置于座椅上的同传设备。频道1为中文频道，频道2为英语频道。如果同传设备故障，请到位于会场后方的同传设备更换处更换。会议结束后，请将同传设备放置在座椅上。谢谢。Distinguished guests, there are simultaneous interpretation devices on your seats. Channel 1 is for Chinese and Channel 2 is for English. If you have any problem with the interpretation devices, please ask the staff at the back of the hall for help. At the end of the conference, please leave your interpretation devices on your seats. Thank you very much. 尊敬的来宾，请注意置于座椅上的同传设备。频道1为中文频道，频道2为英语频道。如果同传设备故障，请到位于会场后方的同传设备更换处更换。会议结束后，请将同传设备放置在座椅上。谢谢。尊敬的各位来宾，大会将在5分钟后开始，请您尽快就座，并将手机等通讯设备置于静音状态。谢谢合作。Distinguished guests, our conference will start in 5 minutes. Please be seated and mute your mobile phones and other electronic devices. Thank you for your cooperation. 尊敬的来宾，请注意置于座椅上的同传设备。频道1为中文频道，频道2为英语频道。如果同传设备故障，请到位于会场后方的同传设备更换处更换。会议结束后，请将同传设备放置在座椅上。谢谢。Distinguished guests, there are simultaneous interpretation devices on your seats. Channel 1 is for Chinese and Channel 2 is for English. If you have any problem with the interpretation devices, please ask the staff at the back of the hall for help. At the end of the conference, please leave your interpretation devices on your seats. Thank you very much.
各
尊敬的各位来宾，大会即将开始，请您尽快就座，并将您的手机等通讯设备置于静音状态。谢谢合作。Distinguished guests, the conference will start soon. Please be seated and set your mobile phones and other communication devices to the silent mode. Thank you for your cooperation. 有请主持人主持会议。
Good morning. Welcome to the third session of this morning's 11th Beijing Xiangshan Forum. I'm Zhao Yunfei with CGTN. Thank you for joining us again. This morning we started with the Asia-Pacific security. We also talked about the relationship between China and the United States. And the third session of this morning is the security about Europe. Well, since the beginning of 2020, February 2020, and I'll go precisely, since the end of February 2022, CGTN dispatched reporters to both Russia and Ukraine to cover the humanitarian crisis. I was one of the reporting team. I was dispatched to cover Ukraine. I arrived in Ukraine in April, and I stayed there all the way to June. I stayed in Ukraine for nearly 60 days. And I proceeded with the Ukrainian soldiers. I entered the country from the western city of Lviv and traveled all the way to the east. I went to Kharkiv, I went to Kherson region. The furthest place I've ever been in Ukraine is the Donbas region, Avdiivka. Back then, that place was controlled by Ukrainian troops, but now this place was controlled by Russian troops. But certainly, this panel discussion is about Europe's situation, so it goes way more beyond the crisis in Ukraine. Let me first introduce our guests to our panel. Let's give our first round of applause to both of our two guests. Welcome. Welcome to the stage, gentlemen. Let me introduce both of our guests. Just as I was saying before, each conversation for this morning, we have one Chinese guest and we have one non-Chinese guest. Just to have a little bit of balance in the morning discussions. And we have Professor Cui Hongjian. He is the Professor of Academy of Regional and Global Governance at Beijing Foreign Studies University. We also have Ambassador Alexander Chaldi, President of the Grand Frontal of Ukraine, and he's also the former first Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine. He was the third member of Ukraine's negotiation team in Istanbul. Welcome to both of you. My first question overall is maybe first question to Ambassador Chaldi. What's the situation like in Ukraine at this moment? It's been 2 years since 2022. You can take your mic.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be together with you. Two small observations. First of all, I am very grateful for organizer of 11th Shanghai Forum for invitation me. I looked at the new strategic role of China in global security will do this forum one of the most important platform for discussion of security. It's my first observation. My second observation, I am former ambassador and now I am in non-official status, so I can't express the view of Ukraine. Everything what I try to deliver to you, my messages, this is my personal view. Of course, I try to show you the official position of Ukraine. And I'm now president of Grant Thornton, is a global advisory group. This group present in China, very big group. And I continue to participate in track 2 in many dialogue, especially which has started by humanitarian dialogue, a very famous international organization which promote dialogue and peace all over the world. And return back to your questions, where we are now, we continue the war against Russia aggression. You were in Ukraine first 60 days. When Russia started the war, the perception in the world, I'm sure here in China, that Ukraine lost this war very quickly, not more than 1 month. But we resisted. And in a few months, it will be 1,000 days after the starting of the war. Where we are now, on the front line, situation is difficult, but not critical. In diplomatic and political field, I think position of Ukraine now are more understandable all over the world. So we are continue our struggle, and we believe in our victory. But my personal view that we won this war in end of the April 2022. Why? But after 3-4 weeks after beginning of this war, for me personally, but I'm sure now for all of us, was clear that in principle, Ukraine defended our sovereignty, our independence, and our freedom, and our political regime. Russia didn't capture Ukraine as planned as a country. Of course, Russia captured some part of our territories, but in United Nations, 143 countries vote in favor of recognition sovereignty of Ukraine within the borders of 91. Only 4 countries now recognize Russia illegal acquisitions of Ukrainian territories. So to my mind, in political, in legal, and in military dimensions, we are won this war in 22. Now we try to end this war on the conditions which permit us to establish just and sustainable peace.
You mentioned that we mentioned that you were the third member of Ukraine's negotiating team in Istanbul. You mentioned about the April back in 22. We'll get back to it because that was the point when the two sides is close to a negotiation settlement. But before that, Professor Cui, in a larger scale, how has the situation in Ukraine influenced the overall situation in Europe?
So before I try to give reply to the question, I should tell you that Charlie and me, we are not so strangers, right? Now we have this scholars discussion frequently. I mean, some major players plus Ukraine on the Ukraine crisis online. So I take the value to meet with Charlie face to face, and also very interesting and important discussion here. Yes, also now the whole situation in Ukraine, no matter how could you name it, the war, conflict, or crisis, I think now, indeed, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy, and not only for both Ukraine and Russia, and especially for European countries, for the continent. Also now, this conflict or crisis, this is a very, very big issue for the whole Europe. Is how could they, purchase the so-called peace, and how could take use of which kind of instrument? Only military, or some more political or diplomatic means, and so on. Another, I think, very big concern for me, because I'm an observer or scholars on this situation, is not only the traditional security issue has been raised for most of the European countries, and now especially some economic security, energy security, and even social security. And if we try to expand it to some other related area, even this political security issue has been raised in Europe. If we look at this result of the European Parliament election this June, we can find out more and more so-called far-right wing parties. They won more support from average people, and also for most of the far-right wing party, they try to, transfer this current policy or position of most of the European countries, including European Union institutions. So I think that, indeed, the Europe, its security, its idea about a permanent peace, its security architecture, I think it would be one of the biggest victims from this crisis. But now, of course, I think on the other, thinking about this crisis is how could Europe play a role to help the situation? For example, for Europe, especially for some major players, including France, Germany, and even the UK, could they play a more positive role to help the situation, to find out or not to miss any opportunity to transfer this, bad direction? I mean, just taking use of the military means to maybe a new direction. I mean, the peaceful solution or political solution. So I think that it's a very, very big question now for European countries.
We'll come back to the political solution, but before that, the most recent update, which Ukrainian troops will be considered it's one of the breakthroughs, is the operation in Kursk region. Can you tell us more about that on the battlefield?
About what?
The Kursk, the Kursk region.
Kursk, okay. Look, for us, the situation is very clear. We are victims of Russian aggression, and according with Article 51 of United Nations Charter, we have all rights for self-defense, and from this point of view, we have rights for any legitimate actions against Russian Federation, including the attacks of Russian territories. And we have done it from the first days of the war. We attacks with the rockets Russia territories, Russia ports, and you know that at the beginning of the war, for example, we destroyed one of the biggest Russia warship in the Black Sea. So from this point of view, we attack Russia territory, but not capture Russia historical territory, because now we divide Russia territory within the borders internationally recognized, and the borders which Russia illegally occupied, annexed in Ukraine, because now Russia declared that she has a sovereign right over 6 regions of Ukraine which Russia illegally occupied. Of course, it's totally illegally from point of view of modern international law. So when we start our attack with our troops against Russia territory in Kursk, I think it's totally legitimate. And to my mind, one of the crucial aims of this offensive was to demonstrate the world that no red lines exist for Ukraine in our just struggle against Russian aggression against Ukraine. It's my first message. Second message, we successfully captured some part of Russian territory, and it considerably increased our position during the future possible negotiation on settlement Ukrainian war. And third, there are a lot of military here. They very clearly understand that from a military point of view, we create some new possibilities for us, new instruments, how to influence on the situation on the battlefield, along the whole line of contact with Russian troops. And this is line now more than 100,000 kilometers. This is one of the biggest war in Europe after the Second World War.
Yeah, a lot of people, when I was in Ukraine, a lot of people also mentioned that that's the biggest scale of conflict after the Second World War. Professor Cui, we're talking about the two ways offensive between the two countries. Do you see that this is an elevation of the crisis?
Yes, indeed. As we know, we need to keep I think, a continued observation of the situation. In my mind, there always are two battlefields for this crisis. One is, of course, the military, and not only this situation now in the eastern Ukraine, especially the Donbass, and the other is, of course, now Kursk, that's what we discussed. Another, I think, the battlefield could be political, diplomatic, or some other, even the economic areas. As we know, always this crisis is continuing produce some more spillover effect. So I think that now the major question problem is how could we find out a turning point to stop any escalation, not only in the battlefield of the military and also in the diplomatic or even strategic competition. Because always there is a background, of this crisis, the competition or even confrontation between NATO and Russia, even between the United States and Russia. So I think now, for every stakeholders, now it's time to rethink about how to find out the turning point. Recently, I take a note that some European leaders, including German Chancellor Mr. Schulz, mentioned that, okay, we need to try to find a new balance between the military and the diplomatic ways, including his suggestion to Ukrainian side is if it's possible to invite the Russian representative for the second peace summit and some other. But now, for most of us stakeholders, including major players in the international community, the common ground is, I think nobody wants to have more escalation and lead to a situation in which the crisis will be out of a country. And especially, I think a very bad situation now for Europe is once there is an escalation, once there is a so-called war between Russia and Ukraine, undoubtedly there will be very, very big risk for the whole Europe have been trapped into this, war or conflict.
As Professor Cui just mentioned, two battlefields. One is the battlefield on the ground. Another one is the political battlefield. Do you agree with that? Do you think that the situation in Ukraine kind of challenged the existing system of European situation or European security?
First of all, the war in Ukraine totally destroyed the cooperative security system in Europe. The Helsinki Act was totally raped. The Paris Charter was totally destroyed, uncontrolled debt. So, to my mind, for the first time in European history, after Hitler's illegal annexation of Czechoslovakia, Russia not only started war against sovereign state, but illegally annexed considerable part of this state. And the most interesting, that Russia annexed some territories in Ukraine, which till now Russia not control militarily. It's, to my mind, a very, very interesting fact. So it means it's possible to annex some part of the territories which you even not military control. So, to my mind, international order after the Russia aggression totally destroyed. And, of course, all of us want to return back. But to my mind, if in Istanbul existed possibilities for political settlement of the war, and our negotiation was concentrated on finding political solution. After illegal annexation, approximately 20% of Ukrainian territories in October 22, now it's my personal view, there are no possibilities for political settlement of this war. Why? I explain very clear. Because according to Russian Constitution, Article 37, it's impossible to reduce Russia territory. And it's totally prohibited by criminal law of Russian Federation. So now, not exist constitutional order in Russia which permit reduce illegally annexed territory, exclude them from Russia sovereignty. So what about we discuss with Russia politically? If we want to reach some political settlement, it means we have to change Russia constitution. But Russia constitution prohibited to do changes concerning the territorial question. So to my mind, now we have deadlock for political settlement. This is political settlement possible maybe in long perspective. So to my mind, now exists only one possibility to end this war through ending of hostilities, through establishing the ceasefire regime. The question, where will be this line of ceasefire? Ukraine demand that line of this ceasefire will be on the borders of 91. So it's our official position. So this is my answer. That after Istanbul, we see rebus extensivus, a very important change of circumstances. So now, to my mind, it's practically impossible to reach any political settlement of this war. But it's not mean that we have to stop negotiation and to try to find some diplomatic solutions. Of course, the destiny of this war now is deciding on the battlefield. But to my mind, it's possible in nearest future that diplomacy back.
It sounds a little desperate, Mr. Sui. Do you think that's a real stalemate? Do you think that's a real deadlock?
Yes, if we just look at the situation now, indeed, we have to realize that not yet, for some necessary conditions for, I mentioned that tend to the political settlement or diplomatic solution has been ready. For example, now, as we know, there's still a lot of gap between the political goals from both Ukraine and Russia, not only just for some territory issue and even for some political legitimacy issue. At the same time, yes, still we can find that a lot of even kind of a continuing support from some Western countries to Ukraine. So it looks like a deadlock now. But at the same time, we still try to find some more hopes or more opportunities for tending to the political settlement. For example, now, just like I mentioned, that once there is an operation by Ukrainian side in Kursk, which means the end or the limitation of a military operation could be reached soon. Because as we understand, there is few instruments by Ukrainian side to win on the battlefield by military wins. Similar thing happened for Russia. As we know, once there will be some more escalated response from the Russian side to Ukraine, which means maybe, firstly, Russia have to concern seriously about the possibility to take use of nuclear weapon. Another, perhaps, is Russia have to thinking about to redefine this operation as a war, which means that there will be more mobilization for military force in Russia. once something happens that way, it will give some, I think, higher risk for Russia on its political stability, on its economic situation, and some other. But I think now the situation is, yes, both sides still insist that the military could be most useful instrument to deal with this conflict. But at the same time, both sides is near to, the end or the limitation of the instruments. So I think now for every stakeholders, I think including Russia and Ukraine, and some other major players in the international community, we need to try to take efforts to find out the point to help the situation. I agree with Charlie. Maybe from a Ukrainian perspective, now no way or no space for political settlement. But anyway, I think this crisis could be resolved not only by single part, because anyway it's a crisis with a lot of spillover effects. Every players in the international community, they do have their own responsibility to do everything to help the situation, not to worsen the situation.
Well, Professor Sui mentioned about the spillover effects. Let's talk about that a little bit. It all began with grain export, and then it goes way beyond that. Let's talk about the situation in Zaporizhzhia. What is it like in a nuclear plant? Are you worried about that?
Of course, I'm very worried about Zaporizhzhia, and now exists some questions concerning the Kursk power atomic station. To my mind, and Ukraine very sensitive to these questions. For example, we have a chance not to find a general political settlement, but maybe to find some salami solution concerning some special spheres. And you remember mentioned about the grain deal. But it was success, and humanitarian dialogue, I mentioned, was very active in this process. But Russia withdrew its participation in grain deals. But now, Ukraine very successfully delivered our grain to global market, even more than during the grain deal was in force. Why? Because Ukraine demonstrates Russia the force to control situation in Black Sea, the military capabilities to destroy Russia facilities, especially in Novorossiysk export, and deblock all Russia grain exports, and not only grain exports, but energy exports, oil and gas. So now Ukraine have ability to export grain and other goods from port of Odessa, not because Russia agreed with this, because Ukraine put Russia in such situation that Russia have no chance to block, because we have balance of forces in this region. So it's a very good example how this war, hot phase of this war, can be ended. Only if Ukraine demonstrate balance of forces on the battlefield. And we practically demonstrated the line of front for last 1.5 years practically not changed dramatically. So to my mind, why now a lot of in Ukraine believe in military solution of this war? And the role of diplomacy now is not very important. But to my mind, when I stressed that political settlement now is impossible, it's like relationship between Japan and Russia. Till now, it's not exist political settlement of Japanese-Russia war, Soviet Union war. Not exist formal treaty on peace between Japan and Russia. But both states enjoy more or less stable relations which exclude hot war. So to my mind now the key chance for all of us as soon as possible to exclude hot war phase and to transfer our hostilities in cold format. I think it's now the task number one. And to reach this task, of course, we need some diplomatic efforts. And officially, President Zelensky now appealed to the whole of the world with the idea, as soon as possible, till New Year, to convene second Global Peace Summit concerning the Ukraine. And I think it's a very important initiative which can lead to the ending hot phase of this war. And President Zelensky stressed a few times in his interview that one of his aims to end the hot phase of this war as soon as possible, preferably till the end of this year.
Yeah, military efforts should never be the solution of any crisis, but I want to follow up with that because at the beginning of the crisis, Russia was citing the NATO's eastward expansion. What's your comment on that?
Look, it's very difficult to speak about it with me because I was not a third member because exist a lot of members of delegation. I was the expert of delegation in 22, and in some sense I was a diplomatic volunteer because I proposed my services as retired diplomat, but it was accepted, and I was very glad that I participated in this process. So, when Russia started war, they also demand from us denazification, demilitarization, and a lot of other things than not only NATO. And if during the Istanbul negotiation it was possible to negotiate a future security status of Ukraine as a permanent neutral state, but now I think it's totally impossible. And the crucial question for ending hot phase of the war for Ukraine and for Ukrainian citizens is this is security guarantees which permit for us to expect if this war will be ended in hot phase, who guarantees that it will not resume once more? Who guarantees Russia once more start aggressive attacks against Ukraine? We had a bad experience of Minsk agreements. Exist Minsk agreements, and it was possible to implement them peacefully. But Russia started aggression against Ukraine. So now, for us, the crucial question to end hostilities, this is quality of future security guarantees, especially for Ukraine, a country who gave up the third nuclear stockpile in the world in 1994. And we received security guarantees in Budapest Memorandum from P5, including China. But unfortunately, one of guarantee states, Russia, started aggressive war against Ukraine. So Ukrainian nation, now very sensitive for security guarantees. And now Ukrainian nation believe that only future membership Ukraine in NATO will give us real guarantees. So now Articles 5 for us of NATO Charter, something like the hopes which can guarantee our sustainable security future. So now the question out of discussion. Ukraine now plan do all the best to receive status of member of NATO.
Professor Strait, do you want to make any comment? Are we close to any phase of settlement?
Yes, as I understand from Charlie, is now it looks like a gaming to one of the very, very important goals for Ukraine so far is to be part of the NATO and to be part of the security guarantee system from all of the major players. But we should not forget that before this crisis happened in Ukraine, Russia tried to get a similar security guarantee from NATO, from the United States. So I think now the question is, yes, more and more countries feel lack of the security. They want to get some more safety by different means, military or some other. So I think now, yes, we need to try to find out the different category dimension for this crisis or even its effect to the international security. I think the willing and also some political goals from Ukraine should be respected because as an independent country. But at the same time, I think these structural issues, especially how could we try to take some lessons in life to help, especially European people, European countries, to find the real, principles, commitments, and valuable experience to establish a kind of, cooperative, comprehensive, sustainable security architecture. So I think, yes, Ukraine is trying to, purchase a kind of justice and a lasting peace. But how could we find out the connectivity of this requirement from Ukraine and also the requirement from Russia to be part of this new European security architecture? And even from some other players in Europe, including European Union, France, Germany, to have a real European security architecture with inclusive framework, with more and more cooperative spirit, and especially to achieve a kind of a balance between development and security. I'm afraid that once we could not find out the opportunity to find some new balances between all of these, conflicting requirements, the Europe will pay a lot of a price. It's economic security, energy security, and even recently, as we know, the European Union issued a very big report on its competitiveness. So how could Europe achieve its competitiveness? I think that the very, very simple answer is Europe should play a more positive role, constructive role, to help every stakeholders to end the crisis, to find out any kind of opportunities and wisdom to end the war, to end the tragedy. Otherwise, I think Europe will lose its opportunity to be part of the leadership in the world.
I agree with a lot of ideas which you express, but I want to stress that to ending the war from Ukrainian perception, the security guarantees challenge is crucial, especially after our very special experience after Budapest Memorandum. It's crucial. And from this point of view, it's impossible to restore any security system in Europe without we develop an effective mechanism of such guarantees for Ukraine. Now, I see that these guarantees can be divided into groups. Negative security guarantees which permit Ukraine to deterrence Russia. To deterrence Russia in future to start a new aggression against Ukraine. So from this point of view, we need more weapons, more finance, more sanctions against Russia. And our crucial partners in this is deterrence security policy. This is West countries, NATO countries. So we want to be together with them, within NATO. But exist some kind of positive security guarantees which can prevent Russia from the future aggression. And from this point of view, a very special role of China. We in Ukraine see China as a crucial country, the only single country in the world which in future can influence on Russia in such positive way that prevent Russia from the future aggression against Ukraine. So now we welcome more and more involvement of China in finding solutions how to end hostilities, first of all, and in perspective, the war in Europe. And your 12 major propositions, your common 6-point peace plan with Brazil is a very important steps from China and China security investments in finding decision how to end the war in Ukraine. And President Zelensky, during the former year phone conversation with President Xi, stressed that there are a lot of common with his 10-points plan and Russia 12 major propositions. And to my mind, the crucial in all initiatives of China, a very clear point that security integrity of Ukraine as a principle of modern international law, it's a crucial element in finding future solution. So from this point of view, now we're in a very interesting moment when Ukraine tried to find a common position with China concerning the future formula of fighting ending of hostilities in Ukraine. And you know that 1 month ago it was a very successful meeting between two ministers of foreign affairs of Ukraine and China. It's very important things, and now all of us in Ukraine waiting some contacts, direct contacts between President Zelensky and President Xi, and I think it will be possible in the future. And also we welcome and we expect that China participate personally on the highest level in the second Global Peace Summit on Ukraine. Because now, as we see in Ukraine, as President Zelensky stressed, we not exclude Russia participation in the second Global Summit. But one of the reasons why China avoided to participate in first summit was absence of Russia in the list of participants. Now I think this is obstacles will be taken away, so it's give me some expectation the second summit will be more successful than the first one.
As we wrap up this conversation, go ahead.
I need to get some response. What's Charlie part of the issue is how about China's role in this crisis, and how about China's attitude towards the situation, even for the escalation. I understand that now for some, especially Western countries, they do have a lot of discussion about China's role, and they do have some suspicions about the relations between China and Russia, and to question that China, if it's a real, balance and even kind of a neutral position on this crisis. I would like to say, firstly, China's attitude is as consistent and clear as possible. If you look at it from very beginning, not only from the speech or some comments from leaders and from different level officials, you can find out always China try to find out its own way. Maybe there is an attraction for China is just take a side simply to pro-Russia, pro-Ukraine, or some other. But I think China chose a very, very difficult step, because maybe the situation could be that they will not so satisfaction from Russia, from Ukraine and Chinese stand. But I think that's not the reason why China tried to take its own responsibilities. Secondly, I think that China now is trying to also to do something to help the situation by actually, just like Charlie mentioned, that the 6 points, and also recently the so-called 3 principles, including no escalation in battlefield, no more spillover effect, and even no any unnecessary stimulation to the situation for all of the stakeholders. So I think that for China is we try to find out any favorable environment for negotiation and for any solutions, including ceasefire or withdrawal of military force or some other. But now the question is, China need to have some more partners, have some more positive response from both of Russia and Ukraine. And I think China indeed makes sense clearly about its possibility, and China will not be out of the final solutions, but China will not be in the so-called the hot situation. I think that's a stance or the position China have choose.
I have one last question to each of you, before we wrap up this conversation. Ambassador Charlie, you mentioned about the cessation of all hostilities. Can you elaborate more on that?
To my mind, as I stress, cessation of hostilities, the only one possible way to end the hot phase of this war. And to my mind, now it's very important to study all mistakes which was done during the implementation of Minsk agreement, because Ukraine had a bad experience with cessation of hostilities after 2014, and to develop a sustainable mechanism of cessation of the war in Ukraine. We prefer that this cessation will take place on the border 91. Of course, we very clearly understand in Ukraine that it's a long-term perspectives, but for us it's must. And from this point of view, I want to continue what Professor tried to explain. We in Ukraine not expect China to be pro-Ukrainian. Of course, we in Ukraine against that China will be pro-Russian. What we expect in Ukraine, that China will be pro-China strategic national interest. And we strongly believe in Ukraine that ending hot phase of the war in Ukraine is a real strategic interest of China. Because security in Europe, it's impossible to, without security, sustainable security in Europe, it's impossible to implement your ambitious policy of promotion, trade, belt policy. So to my mind, we believe that China is interested in restoring European security system. And to my mind, put forward different initiatives, you try to be in process. And as you see, especially last half a year, Ukraine very positively react and expect that next month we see the direct high-level meeting between our leaders.
Any last word, Professor Cui? What kind of wisdom should we host at this moment?
Still, I think this situation is at a crossroads. One of them is, yes, escalation, especially military instrument. And even now, we witnessed the visit by Secretary Mr. Blinken and also the Secretary Mr. Lamy to Kyiv. So they are talking about the possibility there will be more military aid to Ukraine and lose the limitation of the usage of Western weapons in Ukraine. But at the same time, I think for China, for some other stakeholders or players, we need to try to make some more joint efforts to, provide some more favorable environment or atmosphere to help the situation. So it looks like a race between military solution and the diplomatic solution. I understand Charlie mentioned that yes, we do have our own interests but not only our own interests. I think China is trying to find out more connection, its own interests and the common interests for the regional countries and also for the international community. Recently, China received some European leaders. They do have a very good discussion on how could China and Europe, they need to strengthen their cooperation on economic and other. So I think, yes, it's also a race of logic between development or more security or more development. Now I think it's a common challenge for every country, including China, is we need to find a new balance between the policy priority between the development and the security. But I believe that maybe one of the big lessons from this current Ukraine crisis is we have to find out that to focus on development itself, we can try to find out more solutions for security. And even once we have some more development, have some more, opportunity to share with each other, certainly it will, give us more hopes to achieve a kind of sustainable security, not only in Europe and also in Asia and some other areas in the world.
It was very honest and constructive conversation. Thank you both gentlemen for speaking with us. And that would do it for this morning edition of This Room in the Beijing Xiangshan Forum. Thank you for staying with us and have a good rest of the day.
朋友都知道我是很挑剔的，防晒乳我选 KS 皇家呵护抗光清爽高防晒凝露，因为它有媲美蓝光神盾的抓藻植萃，保护我在阳光下延缓肌肤老化，维持青春弹力，可以防御工作环境里的3C 商品，各种光源对肌肤的伤害，擦起来清爽不黏腻。我特别喜欢它做到海洋友善。365天，天天抗光抗老化，是我的保养日常。你呢？呵护您，呵护全家人，专属你的 KS Royal Care 抗光清爽高防晒凝露。